Teenager reveals family secret in court. Everyone was shocked. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension, as if everyone inside had forgotten how to breathe. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of restless bodies, murmurs flitting like sparks across a field of dry grass. Then from the witness stand, a trembling voice rose, small at first, but unshakably resolute. "I know what happened to my brother." Emily Peterson's words cut through the silence like a scalpel through skin. The entire room snapped to attention. Every head turned toward the teenage girl, standing alone in the witness box, her hands clutching its edges so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her voice quivered, but there was fire behind it, a fury held back for far too long. Gasps rippled across the room. One juror's pen slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. The stenographer stopped typing mid-word. At the defense table, Robert Peterson, her father, the man once praised as a legal lion, now facing allegations of corruption, rose so quickly his chair screeched backward. "Emily, no! Don't say another word!" he barked, his voice desperate and cracking with panic. But Emily didn't flinch. She took a breath, her chest rising and falling in sharp, shallow pulses. Her eyes glistened, but did not break. "I can't stay silent anymore," she continued, louder now, firmer. "Everyone deserves to know the truth." The judge slammed her gavel against the wood, trying to regain control. "Order! I will have order in this courtroom." But control had already slipped away. Emily's mother sat frozen, her face pale as paper, one trembling hand covering her mouth. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, silent and endless, as though her body had forgotten how to do anything but weep. Emily turned slowly to face the jury. "Jason didn't run away," she said, voice raw with grief and fury. "He didn't disappear. He was forced to leave. And the person responsible." She paused, the words catching in her throat like shards of glass. The room leaned in. You could hear the buzz of the overhead lights, the tap-tap of reporters scribbling notes with renewed frenzy. Emily pointed toward the defense table, directly at her father. "The person responsible is sitting right there." The courtroom exploded. Reporters shot up from their seats, cameras flashing. Lawyers on both sides began shouting over each other. The gallery broke into a cacophony of gasps, whispers, and stunned outrage. Even the bailiffs hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or simply witness the spectacle unfolding before them. But Emily stood as still as stone. She turned her head, almost involuntarily, toward the rear of the courtroom. And that's when it happened. She froze. Her breath hitched. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her wide, tear-glazed eyes locked onto something or someone at the very back of the room. For a moment, it was as if time itself forgot to move. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, she gasped, "Jason?" There, standing in the shadows near the double doors, was a figure no one had expected to see ever again. Jason Peterson, 2 years missing, presumed dead, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken but unmistakably his. He took one cautious step forward, and the room erupted once more into chaos. A woman fainted in the gallery. A reporter screamed. One of the jurors broke down in tears. Robert Peterson, father, lawyer, now accused, stared at the boy as though he'd seen a ghost. His face went sheet white, mouth agape. "No, this can't be." The judge's gavel hammered again and again, her voice strained and barely audible over the tidal wave of panic. "Order! Order in the court!" But there was no order. Jason stood tall, though he looked as if a strong wind might knock him over. His eyes scanned the room until they met Emily's. Something passed between them then, something deep and wordless. Recognition. Relief. Emily's chest heaved as she stared at her brother, alive and standing. Proof that she hadn't been crazy, hadn't been paranoid, hadn't imagined the cold weight of lies that had wrapped themselves around her family like chains. 2 years before the courtroom chaos, before the gasps and gavel strikes, before Jason's reappearance shattered the carefully constructed facade of their family, Emily's life was, by all accounts, normal. Not perfect, but full of warmth, laughter, and the comforting rhythm of suburban predictability. Back then, Jason wasn't a ghost in her memory. He was her big brother, her protector, her secret keeper, the one person who could always make her laugh, even on her worst days. Jason was everything a big brother should be, charming without arrogance, sharp-witted, always teasing her with a grin that made it impossible to stay mad. He helped her with math, snuck her extra dessert when their mom wasn't looking, and stayed up late watching sci-fi movies with her, even when he had practice at 6 the next morning. Their bond wasn't just close, it was unbreakable. At least that's what Emily had believed. And their family? The outside world saw them as picture perfect. Robert Peterson, a respected attorney with a courtroom win streak that made headlines. Their mother, graceful and elegant, always the one hosting PTA brunches and charity fundraisers with a smile. Emily often thought they were like something out of a magazine, but now she knew better. The truth had been hiding in the shadows all along, and the cracks had started to form on one seemingly ordinary Tuesday. That was the day everything changed. It had started out like any other day. Emily was in 7th grade, racing through algebra homework, counting the minutes until dinner. The smell of garlic bread filled the house. Their mom was humming softly in the kitchen, stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce. Jason had been upstairs getting ready for soccer practice. He was whistling, some dumb pop song Emily hated, and when she yelled at him to change it, he just laughed and shouted back that her taste in music was embarrassingly tragic. She didn't know that would be the last time she'd ever hear his laugh in that house. Later that evening, something shifted. It was subtle at first, a tension in the air that didn't belong. Emily had gone to her room to grab a book when she heard raised voices downstairs, sharp, clipped words slicing through the silence. She paused on the staircase, heart thumping. It was her father and Jason. "Do you have any idea what's at stake?" Robert's voice was low but vicious. "You think this is some game?" Jason didn't back down. "I'm not part of whatever this is. I'm not going to lie for you." There was a pause, then the unmistakable sound of something heavy, maybe a fist, hitting a table. "You don't know what you're talking about," Robert snapped. "You've always been naive." "And you've always been a coward," Jason shot back, voice cracking with fury. "You just hide it behind suits and courtroom theatrics." Emily gripped the banister, her blood running cold. She had never heard Jason talk to their father like that. No one had. In their house, Robert's word was final. Arguments weren't allowed, only obedience. She backed away slowly, afraid she'd be caught listening, and retreated to her room. Her fingers trembled as she opened her textbook, the numbers swimming before her eyes. That was the moment she realized something was wrong, terribly wrong, but she never imagined how far it would go. Later that night, Jason didn't come downstairs for dinner. When their mom asked about him, Robert just said, he went out. He needed to cool off. But something about the way he said it, too casually, too dismissively, made Emily's skin crawl. She waited up that night, staring at the clock. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. Still no Jason. She texted him. Called. No response. She crept into his room and found his soccer gear gone, but his phone still sitting on the nightstand. That alone was enough to make her panic. Jason never went anywhere without his phone. Never. The next morning, their mother called the police. The report was filed. Search parties were organized. Flyers were printed, posted on streetlights and school bulletin boards. Volunteers combed the woods near their neighborhood. Every news station in the county ran Jason's photo. But as the days dragged into weeks, and the weeks into months, the momentum faded. Leads went cold. Tips led nowhere. The police began to shift their narrative. No signs of foul play, they said. He probably ran away. That was the official story. The case was quietly closed. Just another teenager who left home, they said. Just another runaway. But Emily knew better. She remembered that argument. She remembered the fear in Jason's voice. She remembered the way her father avoided talking about it, how he buried himself in work, refused to answer questions, shut down every conversation with a cold stare and a colder silence. The house changed. No longer felt like home. Her mother became a ghost, wandering from room to room, sobbing into Jason's old clothes. Her father became even more distant, more controlling. And Emily was left alone in a house full of unanswered questions, screaming truths that no one wanted to hear. She begged the police to reopen the case, showed them the phone, told them Jason would never have left her, never without a word. But they didn't listen. They labeled her grief as denial, her suspicions as childish imagination. They told her to move on. But how do you move on when the last thing your brother ever said to you was a joke about your music taste? How do you move on when you know in your bones he didn't leave you? He was taken? Emily carried that silence for 2 years. 2 years of aching, sleepless nights. 2 years of pretending everything was fine while her world rotted underneath. She didn't forget. She didn't let go. She didn't forgive. Because the truth hadn't disappeared with Jason. It had been hiding in plain sight. In that house, in that courtroom, behind the eyes of the man who told the world he was just a father mourning his son. And just when the courtroom could take no more, when tension had reached its breaking point and Emily's final words hung heavy in the air, Jason stepped forward. The moment Jason stepped forward and spoke, the courtroom collectively forgot how to breathe. "Your Honor," he said, his voice rough, barely louder than a whisper, but clear as a gunshot in a silent room. "I'd like to be sworn in as a witness." A stunned silence fell across the courtroom like a dropped curtain. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the explosion came. Gasps, shouts, a flurry of motion from attorneys scrambling to their feet. The stenographer dropped her notepad. The bailiffs reached instinctively for their belts, unsure whether this was a legal proceeding or the start of something far more dangerous. Reporters leapt to their feet, pens flying, cameras clicking. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a reckoning. Emily sat frozen in the witness stand, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out the chaos. Jason, her brother presumed dead, now standing alive and real, was asking to testify. Not as a victim, not as a son, but as a witness. A witness to what? Her father, Robert Peterson, turned to Jason with a look of raw horror etched into his face. For the first time, the mask of composure cracked, his jaw clenched, his eyes wide. "Jason," he rasped, "don't." But Jason didn't look at him. He stared at the judge, posture rigid, eyes blazing not with fear, but with purpose. "I have information," he continued, louder now, "about what happened the night I disappeared, about what happened in that house." The judge leaned forward, her brow furrowed in disbelief. "Are you saying you're the Jason Peterson listed in this court's records as missing for nearly 2 years? "Yes, Your Honor," Jason answered. "That's me." A tremor ran through the room like a lightning bolt. Emily's mother let out a strangled sob. Jurors sat with mouths open, stunned and confused, but none more shaken than Robert, whose fingers gripped the edge of the defense table like he needed it to stay upright. "This is highly irregular," his defense attorney cried. "This young man hasn't been vetted, hasn't been scheduled. He's a missing person, not a ghost." The judge cut in coldly. "Bailiff, swear him in." Emily watched Jason raise his hand, and for a moment, everything else faded. The lies, the silence, the pain. They all led to this. Her brother was back, and he was about to burn down every lie their father had ever told. But as Jason took the stand, Emily saw it. The way his hands trembled ever so slightly. The way his eyes flickered toward the defense table. The weight he carried wasn't just about surviving. It was about speaking a truth so heavy it could destroy everything. The courtroom fell silent as Jason adjusted the microphone. The weight of 2 years pressing down on every breath he took. His eyes scanned the room, past the stunned jury, past the reporters leaning forward with pens suspended midair, past the spectators who clung to every twitch of his face, and landed squarely on his father. "I didn't disappear," Jason began, his voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. "I was forced to leave." A collective shiver swept through the room. Emily sat frozen, her heart pounding as Jason inhaled slowly, as if each memory he was about to reveal burned on its way out. "It was 2 years ago," Jason continued, his gaze distant. "The night before I vanished, I'd just come back from practice. Emily had been bugging me to help with her algebra. I told her I would, after dinner." A faint, heartbroken smile touched his lips for half a second, before fading. "That night I heard something. Something I wasn't supposed to. He leaned forward, every word slicing through the silence like a scalpel. My father was on the phone, in his office. The door was cracked open. At first, I didn't care. I thought it was just another work call. But then, he closed his eyes, reliving the moment. He said, "If the police find out, it's over. You promised this would be clean." And then he said, "Make sure the paper trail disappears. No loose ends, especially not him." Jason's voice dropped to a whisper. I thought he was talking about a client, until he said my name. Gasps erupted from the crowd. The judge slammed her gavel. "Order!" Jason didn't flinch. I stepped back, but I must have made a noise. The floor creaked, and then he saw me. His eyes flickered toward Robert Peterson, who now sat pale and motionless at the defense table. He didn't yell. He didn't even raise his voice. He hung up the phone, walked over, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "What exactly did you hear, Jason?" Jason's hands clenched on the wooden edge of the witness box. I told him nothing, lied straight to his face, but he didn't believe me. He swallowed hard, the next words barely escaping his throat. He grabbed my arm, said we were going for a drive. Emily felt her blood run cold. Jason's voice shook, but his stare never left the judge. He took me out of the house. I didn't know where we were going. I kept asking, but he wouldn't answer. Just drove, for over an hour, into the woods. The jury leaned in. Everyone did. When we finally stopped, he pulled me out of the car, told me to listen carefully. He said if I ever told anyone what I'd heard, he would make sure I disappeared for real. But not before something happened to Emily. Emily's breath caught in her throat. He said it like he'd rehearsed it. Calm, cold. He said, "If you care about your sister, you'll leave. You'll disappear. You'll stay gone." Jason's voice cracked. He told me that disappearing was the only way to protect my family. He paused, the silence in the room now deafening. So I ran. He looked directly at Emily now. Not because I was scared for myself, but because I believed him. I believed he'd hurt you. A tear slid down her cheek. I didn't know where to go. I had no money, no phone, no plan. I just vanished, slept in abandoned buildings, found shelters where no one asked questions, changed my name, changed everything. Jason exhaled sharply. Every night I wanted to come back, but I couldn't. Not until I was sure he couldn't hurt you. The judge leaned forward. What changed? Jason reached into his jacket and pulled out a crumpled sheet of paper. He held it up for all to see. I found this. A ledger, buried in a storage unit registered under a fake name, but with my father's handwriting all over it. It listed names, payments, locations, all tied to some kind of trafficking operation. Whispers exploded in the room. Jason continued, louder now. This wasn't just about me. He was involved in something bigger, and I realized keeping quiet wasn't protecting my family. It was enabling a monster. He turned back to his father, eyes ablaze. I came back because someone had to stop you, because silence doesn't protect the innocent. It protects the guilty. Robert Peterson's face was unreadable, but his eyes were dark with something Emily had never seen before. Rage laced with fear. The judge stared hard at Jason. Are you saying your father threatened your life and your sister's because you overheard a conversation related to criminal activity? Yes, Your Honor, Jason said, and I have the evidence. The courtroom had never been louder. Gasps collided with shouts, whispers turned to roars. Every person in that room had the same expression, disbelief wrapped in panic. But in the center of the storm, Jason stood still, unflinching, resolute. His hand was extended, holding a folded sheet of paper that could detonate everything his father had built. This, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos, is proof. Names, dates, locations, every illegal transaction, and my father is at the center of it. The judge narrowed her eyes, motioning for the bailiff to collect the document. The moment it changed hands, the room seemed to tilt. Robert Peterson, once a towering symbol of legal prestige, suddenly looked small, cornered. His face twitched, but he said nothing, not a word. The judge flipped through the paper slowly. With each turn, her jaw stiffened. This court, she finally declared, her voice cold and commanding, has reason to believe that there may be substantial criminal activity linked to the defendant, Robert Peterson. Effective immediately, the trial is suspended pending further investigation. Silence, no one dared move. Even the air in the room felt frozen, afraid of what would come next. We will begin a full-scale inquiry into the allegations and materials presented, the judge continued. Until then, Mr. Peterson is not to leave the jurisdiction. The family will be placed under police supervision until further notice. Court is adjourned. The gavel slammed. The sound reverberated like thunder. And then all hell broke loose. Cameras clicked. Reporters shouted questions. Attorneys scrambled to regain control of a situation that had long since slipped through their fingers. Emily stood frozen on the witness stand, her heart pounding. Her father, her once untouchable, unbreakable father, looked directly at Jason. His eyes were pure venom. Jason stared back, unshaken. Two bailiffs approached the Peterson family. "You'll be escorted home," one said curtly. "We're assigning officers to monitor the property. You're not under arrest yet, but don't make us regret this." Robert said nothing. He simply straightened his tie, trying to preserve whatever scraps of dignity he had left. But his hands were trembling. Outside the courthouse steps were a battlefield of flashing lights and screaming headlines. "Jason, is it true your father threatened you? Mrs. Peterson, did you know about the transactions? Emily, how does it feel knowing your brother was alive all this time?" Jason wrapped a protective arm around Emily as they pushed through the crowd. Their mother followed behind, dazed and pale, shielding her face from the frenzy. And their father walked ahead, shoulders squared, gaze blank. The car ride home was silent. Not just awkward, unnaturally, violently silent. The kind that wrapped around your throat and dared you to speak. At one point, Emily opened her mouth, but said nothing. What could she say? Their family had been shattered by lies. Their home was no longer safe, and the man they once called Dad had become a stranger, and maybe something far worse. The car finally pulled up in front of their once peaceful suburban house. A police cruiser was already parked across the street. An officer stepped out, nodded toward them, and said, "We'll be rotating surveillance shifts. You'll be safe. Hopefully." No one replied. The front door creaked open. The house welcomed them not with warmth, but with shadows. The silence inside was louder than the chaos they'd just left behind. Their mother collapsed onto the living room couch, head in her hands. Emily lingered in the foyer, staring at the family portrait still hanging on the wall, the smiling faces of 4 people who no longer existed. Jason stood in the center of the room, backpack still slung over his shoulder. He hadn't let go of the truth, not for a second. He turned to Emily. "We're not done." She looked at him, hollow-eyed. "What do you mean?" "The paper I gave the judge. It was just one copy, 1 page." Her heart skipped. "You have more?" Jason nodded. "But I didn't include everything. Not yet. I wanted to see how he'd react." They both turned toward the hallway. The study at the end of it loomed like a locked vault. "Then we go in," Emily said, her voice shaking but firm. Jason gave her a grim smile. "Tonight." Just then, their father entered the room. His footsteps were deliberate, precise. His face was calm. Too calm. "You two," he said, his tone clipped and cold. "Stay out of my office. I won't warn you again." Emily flinched. Jason didn't. He stared at Robert with eyes that had seen too much to be afraid anymore. "We're not your pawns anymore," Jason said. Father narrowed his eyes, jaw tightening. "You don't know what you're doing. You're tampering with something bigger than you understand." Jason's voice didn't waver. "Then help us understand. Unless you're scared." For a second, Robert said nothing. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the hallway like a man trying to outrun a storm. Emily turned to Jason. "What if he destroys everything before we can find it?" Jason's reply was ice cold. "Then we better move fast." And in that moment, they knew. This wasn't just about finding more evidence. It was about survival, because the deeper they dug, the more dangerous the truth became. Title: Into the Lion's Den. The house had never felt more like a trap. It was nearly midnight. The lights were off. the silence unnatural. Emily stood barefoot on the cold hardwood floor, staring down the dim hallway that led to her father's office. The same hallway that used to feel safe when she tiptoed to the kitchen for late-night snacks. Now every creak, every shadow, every breath felt like it could give them away. Jason stepped up beside her, jaw clenched, eyes sharp. "He's asleep. Now's the time." Emily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. "Let's end this." They moved like ghosts, gliding silently toward the door that had always been off limits. Robert Peterson's study, the nerve center of his secrets. Emily had never dared enter it without permission. Even as a child, she'd known instinctively. What lay behind that door wasn't meant for her. Jason picked the lock with practiced hands. A soft click. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a room frozen in sterile perfection. Leather chairs, dark mahogany shelves, files aligned with surgical precision. The air smelled like expensive cologne and something colder. Something hidden. "Close the door," Jason whispered. Emily obeyed, shutting them into darkness. Then Jason flicked on a small flashlight. Its beam cut across the room like a scalpel. They began searching. Jason went straight to the filing cabinet, flipping through labeled folders with lightning speed. Case reviews, client records, donations. But something didn't add up. None of these files explained why their father had threatened his own son into disappearing. Emily moved toward the desk. She checked the drawers, legal pads, pens, neatly folded documents. All useless. Then her fingers grazed something unusual underneath the desk. Tape. Her breath caught. She dropped to her knees and peeled away the edge of a thick envelope duct taped beneath the wood. It was heavy, sealed, and marked with a strange symbol, an angular circle with a bar slashed through the middle. Jason saw it and froze. "That's the same symbol from the ledger, the same one I saw in the storage unit." Emily didn't respond. She ripped open the envelope with shaking hands and dumped the contents onto the desk. Silence, until Jason whispered, "Holy hell!" Inside were pages and pages of handwritten records, rows of coded shipments, dates, locations, payments. It wasn't legal documentation. It was inventory. At the top of one page, scrawled in bold ink, "Willow Creek shipment, unmarked crates, no inspection required." Emily's voice was a whisper of horror. "No inspection? That means they're bypassing customs. These aren't just missed records. They're smuggling something." Jason turned to another page. A list of recipients, all initials and bank account numbers. Offshore accounts, massive wire transfers. "This isn't petty crime," he muttered. "This is organized and deep." Then Emily found the photograph. She held it up to the light, and her stomach twisted into a knot. Her father was standing in a dark warehouse, shaking hands with a man in a black suit. The man's face was partially shadowed, but his posture radiated control, his smile cold and deliberate. Behind them were crates, dozens of them, all unmarked, stamped only with the same symbol on the envelope. "This is the man," Jason said grimly. "The one I saw in court. He was sitting in the back, just watching. He's not a lawyer. He's something else." Emily stared at the photo, bile rising in her throat. Why would Dad be in a warehouse with someone like this? He's supposed to be a lawyer, not... Jason finished the thought for her. A trafficker. They both looked at the documents again. Some of the crates were labeled with acronyms. PH, TQ93, CMLIVE. Emily's eyes narrowed. "Jason, these don't look like drug codes." Jason nodded slowly. "I know. Some of them are weight entries, but others..." He stopped. His voice changed. "Live. Emily, what if these aren't just drugs? What if some of the shipments are people?" Emily's hand flew to her mouth. "No, no way." Jason's voice was steel. "If Dad's involved in this, smuggling people, kids maybe, it's beyond corruption. It's monstrous." They stood frozen, surrounded by shadows and damning evidence. Emily broke the silence. "We have to get this out. Now." Jason gathered the pages, careful not to crumple a single sheet. "We scan it. Make copies. Hide one. Deliver the rest to Detective Harris. Then, voices, distant, muffled. The front door opened. Jason's eyes widened. He's back. Emily's heart shot into her throat. Already? Jason grabbed the envelope. We've got 30 seconds. They shoved the evidence back inside, Emily cramming the photograph into her hoodie pocket. Jason zipped the folder into his backpack and raced to turn off the flashlight. The office door creaked open just as footsteps hit the bottom stair. Jason whispered, "Lights off. Move." They ducked out the side hallway and slipped into the dark laundry room just as Robert's silhouette appeared at the top of the stairs. He paused outside the office door, hand resting on the knob. Emily held her breath so long her lungs burned. Then, the doorknob clicked. Robert stepped inside. Jason leaned in, whispered, "If he finds the envelope missing..." Emily clenched her fists. "We'll never make it out." Inside the study, they heard drawers opening, a chair sliding, papers shifting. Jason pulled his phone from his pocket, opened the camera, and quickly snapped a blurry picture of the photo Emily had pocketed. Just in case, a floorboard creaked. Robert stepped back into the hallway. Jason mouthed, "Go." They moved fast and quiet, through the laundry room door to the garage. The metal doorknob was cold, but freedom was colder. They slipped into the night just as the headlights of the second police cruiser swept across the lawn. Emily looked back at the house that once held birthday parties, game nights, and Christmas mornings. Now it held evidence of something unforgivable. She turned to Jason. "What if we can't stop him?" Jason's voice was quiet, but unbreakable. "Then we burn it all down trying. The fight for justice is just beginning." More shocking twists are ahead. Don't miss a moment. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay with us. Thank you for standing for truth and justice. Where are you watching from? Let us know. The night was too quiet, not peaceful, ominous. Emily sat on the edge of her bed, the glow from her phone barely illuminating her face. Down the hall, the house slept, or at least it pretended to. Every shadow on the wall felt heavier than usual. Every creak of the wooden floors beneath her feet made her freeze. Something was wrong, deeply, horribly wrong. And then she heard it, a sharp clatter downstairs, metal against tile. Not accidental, not the wind. She bolted upright. Seconds later, her bedroom door swung open and Jason stood there, wide-eyed, barefoot, clutching the flashlight they'd used earlier. "You heard that?" he whispered. Emily nodded. "Someone's in the house." They moved silently, avoiding every known squeaky floorboard as they crept to the top of the stairs. From their vantage point, they could just make out a shadow moving through their father's study. Someone was inside the office. Jason squinted. "He's not Dad." Emily's breath hitched. The man was tall, wearing dark clothes, face obscured by a black cap. But what caught her eye wasn't the man. It was what he held. A folder, thick, sealed, and unmistakably marked with the same strange angular circle symbol they'd found on the hidden documents in the study. The man moved quickly, searching, flipping through drawers, scanning the room like he knew exactly what he was looking for. When he opened the cabinet beneath the bookshelf, he found something, and smiled. Jason grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her backward into the shadows of the hallway. "He's taking files. That symbol, he's part of it." "Should we call the cops?" Emily whispered. Jason shook his head. "No time. We need to follow him." They waited. The man moved with military precision, grabbing only 2 more folders before closing the cabinet, slipping the documents into his backpack, and making his way out through the back door without a sound. The siblings followed. Barefoot on cold pavement, adrenaline surging through their veins, Emily and Jason trailed the intruder from a distance. He moved quickly down the street, then disappeared into a black SUV parked under a streetlight. The engine purred to life, the headlights stayed off, and the car pulled away into the night. Jason pointed to their bicycles stashed by the garage. "Let's go." Emily hesitated only a second before nodding. They chased the vehicle from the shadows, keeping just enough distance not to be seen. The SUV turned out of their neighborhood and onto the highway. 10 minutes later, it pulled onto an isolated gravel road leading into the industrial outskirts of town. Willow Creek Storage. The air inside the warehouse was thick with dust and silence, ominous, like the breath held before a storm. Jason's flashlight beam quivered slightly as he swept it across the rows of unmarked shipping containers. Each one looked identical. Cold steel, padlocked, anonymous. But there was one near the back, half hidden in shadow, with the strange angular circle symbol stamped on the side. "That's it," he whispered. Emily nodded, swallowing hard. "Do it fast." Jason crouched, pulling a rusted crowbar from his backpack. He wedged it beneath the lock and, with a low grunt, popped it free. The metal thudded to the concrete floor like a warning shot. The door creaked open with a groan that echoed through the cavernous space. They both froze. No sound. Jason swung the door wide. His flashlight pierced the darkness, and both of them gasped. Inside were stacks of bundled cash. Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. Shrink-wrapped, piled high, pressed like bricks. And next to the money, sealed plastic bags. Dozens of them, each filled with a fine white powder. Emily's voice cracked. "Is that?" "Cocaine," Jason said grimly. "Pure, and a lot of it." Emily stumbled back, hands trembling. "We were right. This isn't just fraud. It's a trafficking ring. This is huge." Jason nodded, eyes locked on the contents of the crate, and our dad's at the center of it. Suddenly, clang! A metal door slammed shut at the far end of the warehouse. Jason and Emily spun around. Out of the shadows emerged a tall figure in a sleek black suit, his face half lit by the moonlight filtering through a broken skylight. Behind him, two men flanked his sides, both broad, muscular, and unmistakably armed. "Well, well," the man in the suit said, his voice smooth and venomous. "Peterson kids, always sticking your noses where they don't belong." Jason stepped protectively in front of Emily, his jaw clenched. "Who are you?" The man's smile widened. "Call me Mr. Black. Your father and I go way back. He used to be very good at following orders. Pity his kids aren't as obedient." Emily's breath hitched. "You were in the photo, in the warehouse." Mr. Black's eyes glittered with menace. "Very observant. And now you've seen too much." He raised a hand. The two men advanced. Jason grabbed Emily's arm. "Run!" They bolted between rows of containers, boots pounding on concrete. Shouts erupted behind them. Commands barked in clipped, cold tones. Footsteps thundered after them. Emily nearly tripped over a coil of wire, but Jason caught her, yanking her upright. "Left!" They veered around a container and burst through a service door into the open night. The lot was massive, filled with shadows and moonlight, crates and silence. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A siren wailed far off. Too far. "Over there!" one of the men shouted. A shot rang out. The bullet hit a metal container just inches from Emily's head. She screamed and ducked. Jason turned, adrenaline surging. "Keep moving!" They raced toward the far fence, lungs burning, legs aching. Jason spotted a low stack of pallets leading to the chain-link fence. "Climb!" he shouted. Emily scrambled up first. Behind her, Mr. Black's men closed in. Fast. Jason shoved the pallets with all his strength, toppling them behind him to slow the pursuit. Emily reached the top and threw herself over the fence, landing hard on the other side. Jason wasn't so lucky. One of the men lunged and grabbed his ankle mid-climb, yanking him down. Jason slammed onto the pavement, the wind knocked out of him. "Jason!" Emily screamed, turning back. The man pulled a knife from his belt. Jason rolled just as the blade slashed the ground beside his head. He kicked upward, catching the man in the jaw, scrambling to his feet. Emily shouted, "Come on, get up!" Jason didn't hesitate. He launched himself at the fence, scaled it in seconds, and tumbled down beside her. Together they ran into the woods beyond the lot, branches slicing their skin, the world around them a blur of black and panic. Behind them, more gunfire, more shouting. Flashlights flickered through the trees. Jason's voice was hoarse. "We can't outrun them forever." Then red and blue lights, sirens, dozens of them. Squad cars peeled into the lot from every direction. Officers poured out with guns drawn. A helicopter floodlight lit up the sky like dawn. "Get down!" A voice boomed through a megaphone. Mr. Black cursed, vanishing into the trees. Jason and Emily stumbled out of the woods, hands raised, breathless and bleeding. Two officers rushed to them. "Are you okay?" one asked, grabbing Emily's shoulders. Jason gasped. "Warehouse, back there. Crates full of drugs, money. They tried to kill us." Emily was trembling. "We have proof. The crates. It's all there." The officer nodded. "You're safe now." But even as those words were spoken, Jason looked back toward the shadows of the trees, where Mr. Black had disappeared. Title: The Confirmation. The air in the police station was ice cold, but Emily couldn't tell if it was the AC or the weight pressing against her chest. Jason sat beside her, his arms crossed tightly, eyes locked on the one-way mirror in the interrogation room. Across the glass sat their father, Robert Peterson, once a man she'd looked up to, now just a shadow behind glass, stoic, silent, and for the first time, exposed. Detective Harris entered the observation room. His face was grave, eyes lined with exhaustion and something else, pity. He held a manila folder in his hand, thick, heavy, burdened with truth. "You need to hear this," he said, voice low. Emily turned to him, heart pounding. Jason leaned forward. Harris opened the folder and spread out a series of documents, wire transfers, photographs, inventory lists, and statements from arrested suspects. One photo showed Robert at the warehouse, standing beside the man Jason and Emily had only known as Mr. Black. Another showed shipping crates, filled with cash and drugs, signed off by documents linked directly to Robert's firm. "He's involved," Harris said flatly. "Not just a silent partner. Your father helped build this operation." Emily's stomach dropped. Harris continued. "He used his legal firm to launder money, falsify customs reports, and cover for dozens of illicit shipments, some involving narcotics, others," his voice faltered slightly, "others involving people." Emily's breath caught. "Human trafficking?" Jason slammed his fist into the table, the sound sharp and hollow. "We knew it. We knew he wasn't just protecting his name. He was protecting a criminal empire." Harris nodded. "We've linked him to at least 7 major operations across 3 states. The documents you two helped uncover, those ledger entries, the photo, the warehouse tip-off, were the final nail." Emily stared at the glass. On the other side, her father sat perfectly still, hands folded, like nothing could touch him. "But why?" she whispered. "Why would he do this? He had everything." Harris sighed. "Power isn't always about need. Sometimes it's about control. Your father wasn't coerced, he orchestrated much of it. And when Jason overheard something he wasn't supposed to, your dad made him disappear, just like he would any loose end." Jason's voice was cold. "He threatened to hurt Emily if I ever came back." Harris looked at them both, somber. "I believe you, and now so will the courts." Outside the room, the world carried on. But for Emily, time had stopped. The truth was out. Her father, the man who once kissed her goodnight and promised to protect her, had been the architect of their nightmares. And now there would be no more lies, only justice. The Peterson house had never been so quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it chokes. Rain tapped steadily against the windows as Emily sat curled on the edge of the couch, her eyes fixed on the front door. Jason stood near the stairs, body tense, heart pounding. He'd seen that look in their father's eyes earlier in court. Robert wasn't finished, not yet. The door swung open. Robert Peterson stepped inside, soaked from the storm, his trench coat hanging off his shoulders. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between desperation and resolve. He didn't look at his children. His eyes scanned the house, then locked onto the hallway leading to his office. "Where is it?" he muttered under his breath. Jason stepped forward. "Don't bother." Robert's eyes narrowed. "Move!" "No," Jason said, his voice rising. "You're not destroying any more truth." Robert's voice dropped into something colder. "You don't know what you're doing?" "I know exactly what I'm doing," Jason snapped. "I'm stopping you." Emily rose behind them. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was steady. "Dad, please. Don't do this." Robert ignored her. He pushed past Jason, heading for the office. Jason grabbed his arm, and for a second, father and son locked eyes. So much was unsaid. Anger, betrayal, fear. Then from the darkness behind them, click, a familiar sound, a weapon being readied. They froze. Out of the hallway stepped Mr. Black, dressed in the same tailored black suit, his face gleaming with satisfaction. His gloved hands held a silenced pistol at his side. "Touching family moment," he drawled. "Really brings a tear to the eye." Jason shoved Emily behind him. Robert turned to face the man, his face pale. "You said you wouldn't come here. And you said you'd handle it," Mr. Black replied. "But instead, your children are playing hero. That ledger should have been ashes by now." Emily's blood turned to ice. "He knows." Jason forced himself to speak. "You're not getting it." Mr. Black's smirk turned razor sharp. "I don't need to. I just need to make sure you never use it." He gestured, and two more men stepped into view, armed, faceless, efficient. One moved toward the study, the other toward the stairs. Jason's brain raced. They needed a distraction. He glanced at Emily, then gave the smallest of nods. She understood instantly. Jason turned back to Mr. Black and stepped forward, arms spread, drawing every eye in the room. "You know what your problem is?" he said, his voice rising. "You always underestimate people, especially kids." "Is that so?" Mr. Black said, amused. "You're so confident," Jason went on. "So sure you've already won." While he spoke, Emily crept backward, slipping into the hallway. Her heart pounded with every step. She ducked into the small side room they'd used before and dropped to her knees. The floorboard, they'd pried it loose yesterday. She pulled it open with shaking hands, reached into her jacket, and pulled out the black leather notebook, thick with evidence, names, dates, wire transfers. The kind of book that could shatter empires. She placed it beneath the floor and slid the board back just as footsteps echoed nearby. Robert stood in the center of the living room, shoulders squared, jaw clenched. Across from him, Mr. Black's gun was pointed directly at his son. Behind them, the other two men spread out, their every move precise, predatory. "You had one job, Robert," Mr. Black said coldly. "Clean up the mess, burn the evidence. But instead, you're here playing house with your two biggest liabilities." Jason was bleeding from his temple, but his eyes were locked on his father. "Tell them where it is, Dad," he challenged. "Give them the ledger. Go ahead. Finish what you started." Emily stood frozen near the stairs, her back against the wall, heart pounding like a war drum. She'd hidden the ledger. She wasn't sure how much time they had left. Robert didn't answer. His eyes flicked between Jason, Emily, and Mr. Black. The weight of years hung over his frame. All the deals made in shadows. All the times he chose silence over truth. All the nights he convinced himself it was for the good of the family. But that lie was crumbling now, right in front of him. Mr. Black stepped closer. "You going to stand there and watch your son die, Robert?" Robert took a deep breath, and then he stepped between Jason and the gun. "Enough," he said, voice low but thunderous. "They're not part of this anymore. You want someone to blame? Blame me." Mr. Black didn't lower the gun. "You're making a mistake." "No," Robert said, slowly raising his hands. "I've made plenty of those already. This is the only thing I've done right in years." Jason blinked, stunned. "Dad?" Robert didn't look back. "Get your sister and run. Don't argue, just go." Mr. Black's patience snapped. "Move, Robert." "No," Robert replied. "Not this time." And then, chaos. One of the thugs lunged toward Emily. Jason intercepted him, tackling the man with a primal yell. They crashed into the dining table, splintering wood and glass in every direction. Mr. Black aimed his gun at Emily, but Robert moved first. He tackled Mr. Black with the desperation of a father reclaiming his soul. The gun went off with a deafening crack, but the bullet buried itself harmlessly into the ceiling. They hit the floor hard, wrestling, struggling. Robert shouted back, "Go!" Jason grabbed Emily's wrist, dragging her toward the hallway. "I'm not leaving him," Emily cried, tears blurring her vision. "We don't have a choice," Jason shouted. Sirens screamed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Back in the living room, Robert and Mr. Black fought like ghosts in the dark, two men with nothing left to lose. Robert took a brutal punch to the ribs but held on, slamming Mr. Black into the wall, buying 1 second, then another. Jason shoved the back door open, pulling Emily into the yard. Behind them, they heard Robert's final yell. "Tell them everything!" Then, gunfire. A single, sharp blast. The world stopped for a breath. And then the police stormed in. Officers flooded the property. Shouts, lights, orders, flashing red and blue, painting the chaos in color. Emily collapsed into Jason's arms, sobbing. Inside, Robert Peterson lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. But Mr. Black was in cuffs, alive, furious, and silent. Their father had paid the price, but he had bought them freedom, not with lies, but with sacrifice. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. The call came just after dawn. Detective Harris's voice crackled through the line, breathless and electric. "We got him! We got Reedman!" Emily froze in the kitchen, coffee mug trembling in her hand. Jason was across the room, eyes widening as she mouthed the words. It felt surreal, like the monster that had haunted their every nightmare had finally been cornered. The man who orchestrated an empire of drugs, laundered cash, inhuman lives from the shadows had finally been dragged into the light. Interpol, acting on the ledger Robert Peterson had hidden beneath the floorboards, had tracked Reedman to a luxury compound nestled deep in the Cayman Islands. The raid was brutal and swift. Armed agents swarmed the estate under cover of darkness, kicking down reinforced doors and crashing through bulletproof glass. There was no cinematic standoff, no final speech from a villain. Just a middle-aged man in silk pajamas, stunned as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. But it wasn't the arrest alone that shattered the entire operation. It was the ledger. Inside Reedman's office, buried beneath loose floorboards and hidden by a false wall, agents found another black-bound notebook, nearly identical to the one Emily and Jason had recovered. It was a map of corruption, names, dates, payment trails, offshore accounts, shipping manifests, encrypted phone numbers. Some of the pages were smeared with what looked like wine, others carefully protected in plastic sleeves. But the message was clear. This wasn't a gang. It was a syndicate, global, systemic, meticulously protected. Within 48 hours, law enforcement agencies across multiple countries coordinated simultaneous raids. Warehouses were stormed, accounts frozen, dozens of high-profile officials, including 2 judges, a customs director, and a sitting congressman, were arrested before breakfast. Media outlets exploded with breaking headlines. The syndicate that once felt untouchable was collapsing in real time. Emily and Jason sat glued to the television as live footage streamed from various cities, crates of cocaine stacked like bricks in a Miami port, trafficked women escorted to safety in Lisbon, European bank executives frog-marched into armored vans. It was a spectacle of long overdue justice. And yet, beneath the headlines, Emily's chest was tight. The cost of this justice had been everything. Her innocence, Jason's freedom, their family. At the heart of every broadcast was one name, Peterson, sometimes spoken with disgust, sometimes awe, sometimes both. Robert Peterson, the once respected attorney, father of 2, architect of his own downfall. His ledger had been the match that lit a fire under a global empire. And though his crimes were undeniable, his final act of redemption, choosing to shield his children and bring the truth to light, reverberated through the system like an aftershock. Still, the storm was far from over. Reporters swarmed their neighborhood. The police had stationed 2 officers outside the house just to keep photographers at bay. Journalists shouted questions from across the street. "Emily, do you forgive your father? Jason, is it true you were in hiding for 2 years? How do you feel knowing your father helped bring down one of the largest smuggling rings in U.S. history?" They didn't answer. They couldn't. There were no words to explain the war they had lived through. The betrayals, the lies, the nights spent wondering if they'd live to see the morning. Their father wasn't a hero, but in the end, he wasn't just a villain either. The FBI held a press conference, the director himself announcing the syndicate had been officially classified as dismantled. Applause echoed through the room when the arrest of Reedman was confirmed. Names of conspirators filled the screen behind the podium. Some Emily recognized from business dinners and family events, smiling men in suits who'd once patted her head and called her bright-eyed. Now they were fugitives, their photos stamped with red banners that read, "Wanted." The weight of it all crashed down like a wave. Jason slumped onto the couch beside her, exhaling slowly. "It's over," he whispered. "It's really over." Emily nodded, eyes glassy. "We survived it." But even as she spoke the words, she knew survival was just the beginning. The handcuffs clinked as they locked around Robert Peterson's wrists. It was a quiet sound, almost gentle. But for Emily and Jason, it thundered through the courtroom like a death knell. He didn't resist. No outburst, no pleas. Just a man in a wrinkled suit lowering his head as the judge read out the sentence. 5 years in federal custody, reduced from 20 in light of his cooperation, and the fact that he had risked his life to protect his children in the final hour. Justice tempered by redemption. But for Emily, it still felt like grief. She didn't cry when they took him away. Not in front of the press, not in front of the agents who'd watched her home become a war zone. But when she got back to that house, the same house where the lies began, where the floorboards still remembered the sound of her father's footsteps, she curled up on the stairs and broke. Jason sat beside her, silent, his fists clenched on his knees. No words, just the unbearable weight of absence. Living without him was like learning to breathe differently. Some mornings, she still heard his voice calling for coffee. Some nights, she still expected to hear his car in the driveway. But every echo reminded her that the man who raised them had lived 2 lives, and the second had nearly destroyed the first. Still, they didn't crumble. Jason, once angry and reckless, began volunteering at a local youth center. He worked with kids who knew too much about pain, kids who reminded him of himself, the version who almost disappeared forever. He didn't talk about what he'd been through, but he listened. And when they trusted him enough to share their stories, he guided them, gently, fiercely, away from the edge he had once teetered on. Emily poured her rage and grief into writing. She started with a blog post, raw and unfiltered. "My father was a criminal, and he saved my life." The story spread like wildfire. Thousands of shares, comments from strangers who whispered their own truths. She kept writing about corruption, betrayal, justice, and what it means to love someone who has done unforgivable things. She wrote not for sympathy, but as a warning. Secrets don't protect families. They destroy them. But healing was not linear. There were days when the house felt too empty, too loud with silence. Emily would find Jason standing in their father's old office, just staring at the books, the desk, the empty picture frame where their family photo used to be. "Do you think he hated who he became?" Jason once asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily didn't know how to answer. Maybe he did. Maybe he hated that the line between protector and criminal had blurred so far he couldn't see it anymore. But what she did know, what they both knew, was that their father had chosen to stop running. In the end, he had faced the monster he helped build and burned it down from the inside. That mattered. The world, however, wasn't always so forgiving. Headlines followed them for months. Peterson kids speak out. Children of corruption, from victims to voices. Some people applauded them. Others whispered behind their backs. But Emily and Jason kept moving forward, not because it was easy, but because they had survived too much to ever be silent again. On the anniversary of the trial, Emily stood in front of a crowd at a youth summit. Her palms were sweaty. Her heart raced, but her voice was steady. "I used to think justice was a clean, sharp thing, that once the truth came out, everything would be okay. I was wrong. Justice is messy, it's painful, it takes pieces of you before it gives anything back. But it's worth it, because silence rots everything." The audience fell quiet, her words lingering like smoke. That night, she and Jason walked home together under the stars. Their neighborhood felt different now, safer, stronger, like it had been rewritten, like they had rewritten it. Jason nudged her. Think Dad would be proud of us? Emily looked up at the same sky that had watched over them during every lie, every loss, every impossible choice. She smiled just a little. Maybe, she said, but what matters is we're proud of us. The sky was painted in fire, streaks of orange and red melting into the horizon like the final brushstrokes of a long, violent day. Emily sat on the porch steps, her knees hugged to her chest, her notebook resting in her lap. Beside her, Jason leaned back in the old wooden chair, its legs creaking with every gentle sway. They hadn't said much in the last hour. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was shared, earned. They watched as the sun sank behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. The same yard where 2 years ago, Jason had vanished without a trace. The same yard where secrets had fermented like poison beneath their father's footsteps. Now it was just grass and dusk and 2 siblings who had lived through hell and come back standing. Jason exhaled slowly, eyes on the skyline. You remember the night we followed the guy in the black suit to the warehouse? His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. The way the air felt, like we were already too deep and there was no way back. Emily nodded, her throat tight. I remember thinking we wouldn't make it out, that we'd be buried in one of those containers, just more names on a cold case board. Jason smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. We should have died that night. But we didn't, Emily said, her voice firmer now. We didn't die. We didn't disappear. We didn't stay silent. The words echoed, lingering between them. Emily glanced down at the notebook on her lap. The cover was black, scuffed, and covered in smudged ink. It wasn't the infamous ledger. It was hers, her own record of truth, her own reckoning. On the front cover, scribbled in bold red ink, were the words, "We didn't stay silent." She opened the notebook, flipping through pages filled with her handwriting, chaotic at first, scribbled in rage and grief, but becoming steadier as the weeks passed. Every lie, every betrayal, every impossible decision, they were all there. The night Jason was forced to flee, the day she took the stand, the moment their father stood between them and the barrel of a gun. Jason leaned over, his eyes scanning the page. You're turning it into a book, he asked. Emily nodded. A memoir, a warning, maybe even a lesson. Jason's brow furrowed. Won't that reopen wounds? Some wounds need to be reopened, Emily said, so they don't get infected, so they don't spread in silence. Jason sat back, the words sinking in. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't look like the terrified little sister clutching his hand in the dark. She looked like a survivor, a fighter, a truth teller. You've changed, he said quietly. So have you, Emily replied. He grinned. Guess we're not kids anymore. No, she said, her eyes drifting back to the fading sun. We're not. The door behind them creaked open, and their mother stepped out, holding a tray with 2 mugs of hot tea. Her hands still trembled slightly, and the dark circles beneath her eyes hadn't completely faded, but she was healing, in her own time, in her own way. She set the tray down on the railing and kissed them both on the head. I'm proud of you, she said simply, then turned and went back inside. Jason picked up a mug and took a sip, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You know, he said slowly, I used to think we had to fix everything. Bring back the family we lost, the way it was before Dad, before all of it. Emily stayed quiet, waiting. But now I think maybe we don't need a perfect family, Jason continued. We just need one that's honest, one that doesn't pretend, one that survives. Emily smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. We don't need a perfect family, she echoed, just a real one. Jason nodded. Exactly. We don't need perfect. We just need true. The sky was darker now, stars beginning to blink into view. In the distance, a car passed slowly, headlights sweeping across the driveway before disappearing into the silence of the street. The world outside still turned, still dangerous, still unpredictable. But on this porch, for the first time in a long time, there was peace. Emily looked at her notebook one last time and closed it gently. "I'm going to finish this," she said, "and when I do, I'm going to share it, because someone, somewhere, might be stuck in the kind of silence we used to live in, and they need to know that survival is possible." Jason reached over and gave her hand a light squeeze. "Then let's make sure they hear us." And together, under a sky full of stars and the weight of everything they'd survived, they sat in the quiet, unafraid, unbroken, and ready to begin again. White judge finds black woman, only to learn she's a billionaire. The old courtroom doors creaked as Alicia Monroe stepped into room 204 of Southside Municipal Court. The walls, chipped and faded, reeked of stale coffee and forgotten justice. A dozen tired faces glanced her way, some indifferent, others quietly judging. Dressed in worn jeans, a gray hoodie, and scuffed sneakers, Alicia carried only a folded parking ticket and her phone. No lawyer, no folder, just herself. And that was already too much. On the bench sat Judge Raymond Keller, 63, cold blue eyes, a face carved from stone. His black robe was flawless, his reputation even sharper. For 30 years, he'd ruled the courtroom with quick judgments and zero patience, especially for people who looked like Alicia. A bailiff barked, "Case 116, Monroe, Alicia. Parking violation." The clerk called her name, and Alicia moved toward the defendant's table with quiet dignity, her steps steady but eyes cautious. Every motion she made felt observed, scrutinized. A man 2 rows behind her muttered, "Should have known." Someone else snorted. A ripple of amusement passed through the benches like static. Judge Keller adjusted his glasses, looking at the docket, not at her. "Ms. Monroe," he said, voice sharp and cutting, "you were cited for parking in a commercial loading zone for 47 minutes. Do you deny the charge?" Alicia began to speak. "Your Honor, Do you deny the charge?" he repeated more forcefully, eyes now meeting hers for the first time. There was no curiosity in them, only contempt wrapped in protocol. She swallowed the frustration in her throat. "No, Your Honor, but if I may explain—" "There is no but," he snapped, silencing the room. "This court doesn't entertain excuses. You parked illegally. That is a fact." "But it was an emergency," she tried again, standing her ground. "There was—" "Ms. Monroe," Keller interrupted, his voice a razor's edge. "You think you're the first person to have a so-called emergency in this courtroom? I've heard it all. You people always have a story." That phrase, "you people," hung in the air like a slap. Someone in the back stiffened. The clerk stopped typing for just a second. Alicia's lips parted, but she said nothing. She'd been here before. Not this courtroom, but this moment. The moment when speaking would make it worse. When dignity was confused with defiance. When silence wasn't weakness, but survival. Judge Keller continued, pretending not to notice the shift in the air. "The standard fine for parking in a loading zone is $100. However, considering the flagrant disregard for commercial traffic and your clear failure to take responsibility," he paused, his gaze scanning her attire with unveiled disdain, "I am increasing the fine to $2,800. Gasps erupted from the courtroom. Alicia didn't move. The number echoed in her ears like a gunshot. $2,800. For parking. For not fitting into his mold of what responsibility looks like. For walking into his courtroom in jeans and sneakers. For being calm when he expected tears. Respectful when he wanted submission. The silence that followed was heavy, unnatural. A man to her left muttered, "Damn." A woman near the door shook her head slowly, whispering, "That's robbery." But no one spoke aloud. No one challenged him, because they knew what she now knew. This wasn't just about a parking ticket. It was about control, about putting people in their place, and Alicia had just been designated. Judge Keller banged his gavel once, dismissively. "Fine is due immediately. Step aside." Her body didn't move, but her mind raced. She wasn't angry, not yet. What she felt was something colder, deeper, the kind of chill that settles in your spine when you realize this isn't an isolated event. This was routine, a machine of discrimination finely tuned over decades. She was just another cog it tried to grind down. Alicia's voice cut through the cold silence of the courtroom, calm but unwavering. "Your Honor," she began, steadying her breath as every pair of eyes shifted toward her. "May I ask why the fine has been set at such an unusually high amount?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Judge Raymond Keller leaned back in his high-back leather chair, folding his hands slowly, deliberately, like a man preparing to crush something delicate between his fingers. He narrowed his eyes at Alicia, the corners of his mouth curling. Not into a smile, but into something darker. The kind of smirk that doesn't amuse but threatens. He let a long theatrical silence stretch between them before speaking. "You may ask," he said slowly, "but don't expect an answer you'll like." His voice slithered through the room like oil over fire, controlled, slick, and seething with contempt. "You see," he continued, tone sharp and dripping sarcasm, "this city operates on rules. Rules that keep the streets functional, the businesses running, and the people, real, working people, safe and on time. When someone like you decides that those rules don't apply to them, it creates chaos." Alicia blinked once, absorbing the blow. Her hands tightened slightly around the ticket, knuckles white. "You think your situation is special?" he went on, raising an eyebrow. "That you deserve leniency for inconveniencing delivery drivers, blocking business access, and disrupting commercial flow for almost an hour?" He shook his head slowly, lips pursed in mock disappointment. "That's not how society works, Miss Monroe." He stood up then, slow and theatrical, his robe billowing slightly as he stepped down from the bench. The room stiffened. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Keller stopped a few feet from Alicia, towering above her with the full weight of his robe and authority. "Let me be perfectly clear," he said, voice lowered but deadly sharp. "What you did wasn't just a parking violation. It was a blatant act of irresponsibility, a middle finger to the system, an entitled stunt from someone who clearly thinks rules are optional." A hush swept through the courtroom. Somewhere, someone sucked in a breath. He pointed a finger at her. "You are the very reason this city struggles with lawlessness. People like you, who think showing up in jeans and sneakers somehow earns you sympathy." He paused, sneering. As if appearance could mask attitude. Alicia didn't flinch, not physically, but inside something cracked. Not in weakness, but in clarity. It wasn't just about the fine anymore. It wasn't even about the parking. This man had already judged her from the moment she walked through those courtroom doors. Not based on facts, not on law, but on who she was, what she looked like, how she carried herself. And now he was trying to make an example out of her, for daring to ask why. She stared straight ahead, refusing to drop her gaze, refusing to give him the satisfaction of fear. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. The fire that had smoldered quietly beneath her calm exterior was now awake, roaring behind her eyes. Judge Keller turned his back and returned to the bench. "Fine remains $2,800, he declared coldly. "No further discussion." From the far left bench near the clerk's table, Marcus Reed sat still, his fingers laced tightly in his lap as he watched the exchange unfold with growing discomfort. A second-year law student interning with the court, he had been told to observe and learn from Judge Keller's courtroom. But nothing in his textbooks or seminars had prepared him for the cold disdain he was witnessing now. Alicia Monroe stood before the bench, composed but clearly being targeted. Her tone was respectful, her posture professional, and yet every word she spoke was treated like an offense. Every breath she took seemed to annoy the judge further. Marcus had seen defendants come through that courtroom all week, some in wrinkled suits, some in tank tops and slides. But never had he seen a reaction quite like this. Not for a simple parking violation, and certainly not this level of hostility over a $2,800 fine. Judge Keller glanced down at the docket, then up again, his mouth curling into that familiar smirk Marcus was quickly learning to dread. "If you're having difficulty affording the fine," Keller said, his voice sharp with artificial concern, "you can always apply for public assistance. I'm sure the city has a program for people in your situation." The words hung in the room like a rotten stench. Your situation. Marcus's spine stiffened. It wasn't what Keller said. It was how he said it. Patronizing, loaded, laced with the kind of insinuation that didn't need to be explained. The courtroom, filled with routine murmurs just minutes before, had gone deathly silent. Alicia blinked once. Not out of confusion, but restraint. Her face remained neutral, but the temperature in the room dropped perceptibly. She didn't take the bait. She didn't react. She just stood there, letting the insult echo. Marcus leaned forward slightly. His chest burned with something he hadn't expected to feel in this courtroom. Shame. Not for himself, but for the institution he was preparing to join. For the robe he thought represented honor, but now felt like armor for cruelty. He looked around. No one else seemed fazed. Not the bailiff, not the clerk, not the people in the gallery. They'd seen it all before. He turned back to Alicia. There was something remarkable in the way she carried herself, rooted like stone, calm like deep water. It wasn't just defiance, it was clarity. She knew exactly what this was, exactly what she was standing in. Judge Keller wasn't done. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench like a man speaking to a child. Let me give you some advice, Miss Monroe. Next time, try to arrive on time, follow the rules, and wear something that shows you respect the court. Maybe then things will go better for you. Marcus felt heat rise to his face, his hands clenched. That was it. That was the tipping point. This wasn't about the law anymore. It wasn't about order or decorum or even justice. This was personal. This was calculated humiliation wrapped in judicial authority. And Alicia Monroe, who had done nothing but park her car, speak with dignity, and ask a basic question, was being dragged through it simply because Keller could. Alicia finally spoke. Thank you for your suggestion, Your Honor, she said evenly. I'll take that under advisement. Alicia stood motionless for a moment as the echo of the gavel faded, her fine set at an outrageous $2,800. Her face betrayed nothing. No anger, no disbelief, just an eerie calm. Then slowly and deliberately, she reached into her hoodie pocket, pulled out her phone, and unlocked it with a swipe. The screen illuminated her face with a cool blue glow as her fingers moved swiftly, confidently. The courtroom was dead silent. No one dared to move. It wasn't just the fine that stunned them. It was her reaction to it. Most people would have begged, pleaded, cried. Alicia didn't flinch. Instead, she tapped into her banking app, navigated to the payment screen, and pressed send. Then came her voice, clear even and polite, but laced with quiet authority. I'll email the receipt to my legal team, she said, eyes still fixed on her phone. Or if the court prefers, I can have my office deliver a printed copy. A beat of silence, and then just the slightest twitch in Judge Keller's left eyebrow. It was a crack in the marble. He looked up from the docket, his pen hovering midair. Your office, he asked, a note of confusion slipping into his otherwise commanding tone. Alicia lifted her gaze and met his eyes for the first time since the fine had been declared. Yes, she said, enunciating every word with precision. My legal department tracks every transaction, especially when the amount is, let's say, statistically irregular. The temperature in the courtroom dropped by 10 degrees. Several heads turned, murmurs rising like wind before a storm. The bailiff shifted his stance. Jenny, the court clerk, paused in her typing and looked up, her brows furrowed in curiosity. Judge Keller cleared his throat, trying to recover his footing. If you have a lawyer, they should have been here with you today, he said sharply, but the edge in his voice had dulled. Alicia's tone didn't change. This wasn't worth the billable hours, she replied calmly. It's just a parking ticket after all. The jab landed with surgical precision. Alicia hadn't raised her voice, hadn't moved a muscle, but her words cut deeper than any outburst could have. She was making a statement. You don't intimidate me, and I'm not who you think I am. Keller's fingers drummed against the wooden bench. The confidence he'd wielded so effortlessly all morning began to fray at the edges. The room was watching him now, not as the unquestioned authority, but as a man who may have made a dangerous miscalculation. Trying to reassert control, he leaned forward. Miss Monroe, if you're suggesting this court acted outside its bounds, you're welcome to file an appeal. I'm not suggesting anything, Your Honor, she said with a hint of a smile. I'm simply documenting the experience. For internal review. Internal review. The phrase hit harder than any legal threat. It wasn't a protest. It was a warning. In the far corner of the courtroom, Marcus Reed could barely sit still. His eyes flicked from Alicia Monroe, who had just spoken with cold precision about sending the receipt to her legal team, to the judge now sitting tensely on the bench. Something didn't add up, and his gut told him this woman, this unassuming figure in a gray hoodie and jeans, was not who the judge thought she was. Marcus had always been a curious soul. That's what got him into law school, what earned him this internship, and what now compelled his fingers to move swiftly across his phone screen as the court transitioned into the next case. With the volume muted and brightness turned low, he searched her name. Just a harmless Google search. Maybe she was a lawyer, maybe a corporate executive. But what he found nearly made him drop the phone. Alicia Monroe, founder and CEO of Fair Data Systems, pioneering AI and judicial reform. Marcus froze. His heart thundered in his chest. He tapped the article. There it was, Forbes, Time, even a recent 60 Minutes interview. She wasn't just someone with legal knowledge. She was the architect of the most powerful AI-based legal equity tool in the country. Fair Data had already exposed systemic bias in 3 state judicial systems, resulting in the removal of 2 judges and a full investigation of a 3rd. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened a Forbes feature. Alicia Monroe, the billionaire tech visionary taking on America's broken justice system. Marcus looked up slowly, eyes locking back on Alicia, who now sat calmly, legs crossed, notebook closed in her lap. The courtroom moved on, unaware. But Marcus knew. This wasn't just a woman paying a fine. This was the wrong woman to target. He turned to the court clerk beside him, Rebecca, mid-30s, sharp-eyed and generally unshakable. Hey, Marcus whispered, passing over his phone. You should see this. Rebecca frowned, took the phone, and her eyes widened almost instantly. Wait a minute, she muttered. She tapped the screen, reading faster. Then, without a word, she reached into a drawer, pulled out a print magazine she had been flipping through earlier during break, and tore out a page. The glossy photo of Alicia Monroe standing in front of the Fair Data headquarters glared up at them in bold color. Underneath, the caption read, Tech's new giant, the woman who turned data into justice. Rebecca didn't say a word. She walked straight to the bailiff, who raised an eyebrow. She handed over the page, pointed toward the judge, and whispered something. The bailiff nodded. He glanced at Alicia, then at the bench, then walked, quietly, purposefully, up the short steps to Judge Keller's desk. He handed the paper over without a word. Keller, still half occupied with the next case, took the paper with a dismissive gesture, until he saw the photo. The color in his face drained instantly. The courtroom clock ticked once, twice, 3 times. Keller blinked hard. He looked down at the magazine page again, then back at Alicia. She wasn't looking at him. She didn't need to. She already knew. He straightened in his chair, awkwardly adjusting his robe as if trying to reclaim a shred of authority. But it was too late. The shift had begun. Marcus watched it unfold like a slow-motion car crash, Keller's throat bobbing as he swallowed hard, the sudden tremor in his left hand as he set the paper down. The man who, minutes earlier, had wielded his gavel like a weapon of unchecked power, now looked like a soldier realizing he'd picked a fight with a general. A few seats over, another intern began whispering, "Is that really her?" Phones were quietly drawn from pockets. The digital whisper spread like wildfire. One woman leaned to her husband and hissed, "That's the lady from the Justice Reform segment last week. Remember? She caught the Tennessee judge hiding sentencing data?" Others started Googling. Screens lit up with headlines. AI system developed by Alicia Monroe. Flags 400% bias in sentencing patterns. Black tech mogul uses data to dismantle courtroom. Discrimination, from foster child to billionaire. The rise of Alicia Monroe. And there she was, sitting still, calm, poised, watching the court system unravel itself in real time. Keller finally cleared his throat, but the sound came out dry and brittle. "Miss Monroe," he started, the condescension from before gone, replaced by a note of forced civility. "It appears there's been a misunderstanding." Alicia looked up, meeting his eyes not with anger, but with something far more unsettling, understanding. "There's no misunderstanding, Your Honor," she said quietly. "You set the fine. I paid it. That's the system, isn't it?" Keller's mouth opened, but no sound came. Marcus couldn't stop staring. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, not just as a student of law, but as a believer in justice. Because in this room, where power usually crushed the powerless, something extraordinary was happening. The system had underestimated someone who built tools to expose it, and now it was scrambling, stuttering, unraveling under the weight of its own arrogance. Alicia continued, standing slowly, her voice as smooth as ever. "Before I leave, I'd like to make a formal request for all court audio, transcripts, and docket records from this morning's proceedings. My team will be reviewing them." The silence that followed was nuclear. Keller nodded, unable to speak. Marcus couldn't stop staring. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, not just as a student of law, but as a believer in justice. Because in this room, where power usually crushed the powerless, something extraordinary was happening. The system had underestimated someone who built tools to expose it, and now it was scrambling, stuttering, unraveling under the weight of its own arrogance. Without ceremony or haste, Alicia reached into her pocket and pulled out a small black leather notebook. Its cover was slightly worn, the corners bent from frequent use, but its presence in her hand commanded more attention than any raised voice ever could. Slowly, deliberately, she flipped it open to a clean page. The pen in her fingers moved with mechanical precision as she began to write. Time of hearing, 10:07 a.m. Presiding Judge, Raymond Keller. Charge, parking in a loading zone. Standard fine, $100. Fine issued, $2,800 notes. Repeated interruptions during the defendant's explanation. Use of phrase, "you people." Reference to public assistance. Statement, "If you can't afford it, apply for help." Judge Keller stared at her, lips slightly parted. The silence from him was deafening. His authority, just moments ago ironclad, now felt brittle, like porcelain straining beneath a hammer. Each stroke of her pen was a crack, each detail she captured, a reminder. This is being recorded, not just in court, but in history. The sound of her pen scratching paper was the only movement in the room. Everyone watched her, as though afraid to breathe, and missed the next blow. Then she looked up, calm, centered, with a steady fire behind her gaze. Her voice was soft, but every syllable struck like a gavel. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "I will be filing a formal complaint regarding today's proceeding. I'd like to request a full transcript of this hearing, including audio files, docket records, and any judicial notes associated with this case." Keller blinked. He opened his mouth as if to object, then quickly closed it again. The room waited for his response, but none came. "I assume," Alicia continued, "that all recordings are preserved digitally as required by Procedural Standard 3.4.5 for municipal courtrooms." Her tone wasn't aggressive. It didn't need to be. It was clinical, sharp, like a surgeon, not a soldier. "Yes," the judge finally muttered, unable to meet her gaze. "All proceedings are recorded." "Good," she replied, returning her eyes to the notebook. "My legal team will submit the proper motion before noon." Jenny, the court clerk, instinctively began typing again, faster than before. Her fingers shook slightly, but her eyes were fixed on Alicia, as if trying to capture every word. Jenny had seen plenty of hearings in her time, but she'd never seen someone flip the courtroom like this, with words, with presence, with strategy. Judge Keller sat stiffly, fingers pressed together in a steeple, but the tremor in his right thumb betrayed him. He was used to control, used to fear. But Alicia wasn't afraid. She wasn't even angry. She was measured. That made her far more dangerous. "Miss Monroe," Keller said finally, struggling to regain his authority, "this court is not accustomed to being challenged in such a formalized way. It's a simple traffic violation. Is all this truly necessary?" Alicia didn't flinch. It's precisely because it's a simple traffic violation, Your Honor, she replied, that it warrants examination. When a $100 infraction turns into a $2,800 punishment, with no explanation, no due process, and no opportunity for proper defense, then the simplicity becomes the problem. The room stirred again. A woman near the back wiped tears from her eyes. A young man in a suit mouthed, "Damn." The tension wasn't just thick, it was suffocating. Keller sat back, robe rustling, jaw clenched. The predator had become the prey, but the trap hadn't been sprung with rage. It had been written. Alicia clicked her pen shut, slipping it into the spiral binding of the notebook. "To be clear," she added, "this isn't about me. It's about how many others have been treated the same way, in this same room, without a voice or the means to fight back." Marcus, the intern, felt something stir in his chest. A pulse of pride, of vindication. He'd seen the system from the inside. Now, for the first time, someone from the outside was shattering the walls brick by brick, and she was doing it without shouting, without threats, without spectacle. Just facts, just truth, just documentation. Keller leaned forward again, his voice quieter now. "Miss Monroe, if there were any—" Alicia raised her hand, not rudely, just enough to stop him mid-sentence. "I don't need justification, Judge," she said. "What I need is transparency. What I need is accountability." Keller froze, and that was it. The gavel hadn't moved, but the judgment had already shifted. The courtroom was no longer his. She closed the notebook, tucked it under her arm, and nodded toward the clerk. "Thank you, Ms. Martinez. I'll follow up for the full documentation." Jenny nodded, almost reverently. Alicia turned and began to walk, her steps echoing down the aisle like drum beats. No applause followed. No one dared. But every single person in that room felt it. That charge in the air, that electric hum that only happens when something irreversible has just occurred. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't broken a rule. She had just written history, in black ink, on courtroom time. And Judge Raymond Keller, for the first time in 30 years, had no control over what happened next. The video hit social media less than 3 hours after Alicia Monroe walked out of the courtroom. At first, it was just a grainy clip, recorded discreetly from the back row by a woman clutching a tattered handbag, her hands trembling as she held her phone low. Footage shook slightly, but the audio was crystal clear. You could hear the judge's voice, dismissive, condescending, as he told Alicia to apply for public assistance if she couldn't afford the fine. You could hear the gavel drop like a slap, and then you heard Alicia's voice, calm, steady, unshaken. "I'll be requesting the full transcript of this hearing, including audio files, docket records, and judicial notes. My team will be reviewing them." Those words hit the internet like a lightning strike. Within minutes, the clip was reposted on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, captioned with a simple phrase, "She didn't shout, she didn't cry, she documented, shocks, justice for all." And that hashtag exploded. By evening, the video had reached over 2 million views. By midnight, it had climbed to 10 million. People weren't just watching, they were remembering. Comment after comment poured in, stories from across the country, each one more gut-wrenching than the last. "My mom was fined $600 for a cracked taillight. She couldn't afford rent that month. I was arrested for missing a court date I never got a notice for. I showed up in scrubs after working a night shift. The judge mocked my appearance." It was like a collective dam had burst. Decades of quiet suffering now had a name, a face, and a rallying cry. Justice for all trended globally within 24 hours, and at the center of it all was a 45-second clip of a woman who never raised her voice, because she didn't need to. Alicia's inbox exploded. Her office phone lines were jammed. News outlets from coast to coast scrambled for interviews. But Alicia said nothing. Not yet. She wasn't interested in a soundbite. She was preparing a case. Meanwhile, Judge Keller sat in his office long after sunset, the courtroom empty, the hallway quiet. The soft glow of his computer screen illuminated his face as he scrolled through the headlines. Tech billionaire humiliates judge in court. Black woman silently dismantles courtroom injustice. This one parking ticket could bring down an entire system. The video played again on loop. His voice, her response, the silence after. He rubbed his temples, but the ache wouldn't go away. This wasn't going away. Across the city, people gathered in cafes, on college campuses, in living rooms, watching, rewatching, discussing every second of the video. Law students broke it down like a Supreme Court decision. Civil rights activists called it the spark they'd been waiting for. Politicians tweeted vague support. Even celebrities began speaking up, reposting the clip with their own testimonies. But it wasn't about fame. It wasn't about Alicia's wealth or status. It was about what she represented, a citizen demanding fairness in a system that had long forgotten how to deliver it. The next morning, thousands of people began sharing their own court transcripts, ticket stubs, fine statements, proof of injustice long endured. Some uploaded videos of themselves reading their sentencing out loud, exposing the staggering disparities in fines and jail time based on race, income, and appearance. A 17-year-old in Detroit posted a photo of a $1,100 fine for riding a bike without a helmet. A single mom in Dallas showed her $2,400 parking ticket, nearly identical to Alicia's, but issued a year prior without a single raised eyebrow. It was no longer just Alicia's story, it was everyone's. Meanwhile, Alicia and her team were working around the clock. Inside her downtown office, walls were plastered with printouts, spreadsheets of court records, red-marked quotes from judges, graphs highlighting sentencing patterns across demographics. Her AI system, Fair Data, was already crunching hundreds of thousands of entries from public court databases. What they were finding was worse than they expected. In a single district, judges had issued fines to black defendants that averaged 410% higher than white defendants for the same offenses. In another, the likelihood of jail time for a first-time infraction was 6 times higher for people living in low-income zip codes. These weren't anomalies, they were patterns, and Alicia was ready to expose them all. She held off on media requests, choosing instead to release a formal video statement posted from the official Fair Data channel. She sat in front of a plain black backdrop, wearing the same hoodie from the courtroom. Her words were calm, measured, powerful. What happened to me was not unusual. What made it different was that I recorded it. This isn't about me. This is about the thousands who've stood in courtrooms and been silenced, ignored, and judged before they could speak. Justice should not be based on your clothes, your skin, or your income. It should be based on facts and on truth. That's why we've launched the Justice for All project, to collect, analyze, and publish the data courts don't want you to see. If you've been fined unfairly, if you felt targeted in court, if you've been denied dignity, you are not alone. We're listening, and this time, we're documenting everything. The video was shared over 100,000 times in its first hour. Alicia didn't need to shout. She had built a machine that spoke louder than any voice ever could. Back at the courthouse, Judge Keller's name appeared in an official press release from the State Judicial Oversight Committee. An independent investigation had begun. The fight for justice is just beginning. More shocking twists are ahead. Don't miss a moment. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay with us. Thank you for standing for truth and justice. Where are you watching from? Let us know. In a high-rise office overlooking downtown Chicago, the lights in Alicia Monroe's headquarters burned well past midnight. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the buzz of activity inside. A war room alive with urgency. Charts plastered every wall, monitors displayed endless rows of court data, and the steady hum of a dozen computers filled the space like background music to revolution. Alicia stood at the head of a long glass table, surrounded by a hand-picked team of 15 data scientists, legal analysts, and civil rights researchers. They weren't here to speculate. They were here to expose. Over the course of 5 grueling days, Alicia's team had ingested over 10,000 case files tied to Judge Raymond Keller, spanning 5 years, dozens of court sessions, and countless lives. The data, now cleaned, sorted, and visualized, told a story more damning than anyone had imagined. On a massive digital display, the first figure lit up in crimson red. Average fine differential, plus 412% for defendants of color. Alicia narrowed her eyes. "Run it again," she said, though she already knew the result wouldn't change. Across the table, James Chen, her lead analyst, tapped a few keys. The same number reappeared, blinking like a siren. "We checked it 3 different ways," he said grimly. "It holds." The room fell quiet. The kind of silence that's not passive but explosive. One breath away from eruption. Alicia turned to the next screen. "Show me incarceration rates." With a single keystroke, the data shifted. A bar graph exploded onto the wall. Incarceration versus probation for identical misdemeanors. Black defendants, 63% incarceration. White defendants, 12% incarceration. The room froze. That number wasn't just disturbing, it was apocalyptic. One of the younger data scientists, Malik, leaned forward, his face pale. "That's 5 times more likely to be jailed," he whispered, "for the exact same charge." Alicia didn't blink. She was past shock. "What about due process?" she asked. "Objection rights? Appeals granted?" James hit another button. The screen shifted again, displaying rows of audio logs and transcript patterns analyzed by the Fair Data AI. At the bottom, the final statistic glowed like an indictment from hell. 89.4% of minority defendants were interrupted or denied the opportunity to explain or appeal. Alicia slowly stepped back from the screen. The weight of the truth pressed against the room like a vice. For years, people had whispered about systemic injustice. But this wasn't a whisper anymore. This was data, undeniable, unforgiving, weaponized truth. "These aren't isolated incidents," Alicia said quietly. "This is a pattern, a judicial blueprint built on silence, fear, and unchecked power." The entire team stared at the wall of numbers. What they had uncovered wasn't just negligence. It was a machine, a system fine-tuned to punish the voiceless and reward indifference. Malik broke the silence. "He wasn't just biased, he was deliberate." James nodded. "His sentencing guidelines deviated only when the defendant was white, wealthy-looking, or accompanied by a private attorney." Another researcher chimed in. "He reduced over 300 fines by more than half when the defendant was wearing a suit." "And," added James, scrolling to a new graph, "in 78% of those cases, the defendant was white and male." Alicia folded her arms, her voice cold as steel. "So appearance determined leniency. Not facts, not context, costume justice." She turned to the team. "Document every variable. Highlight the differences in language. I want transcripts showing tone, interruptions, and judicial phrasing side by side." They nodded. No one needed convincing. This wasn't about one man anymore. This was about a system hiding behind black robes and wooden benches, a structure that punished based on skin tone, dress code, and zip code. Outside, the city slept. But in Alicia's war room, the energy was electric, driven not by outrage alone, but by precision. They weren't just fighting emotion, they were arming themselves with facts, and the facts were damning. By the next morning, the report was complete, a 200-page dossier filled with charts, heat maps, testimony summaries, and annotated court records. The cover read simply, "Bias in Black Robes, a 5-year analysis of judicial disparities in courtroom 204. Alicia held it in her hands like a sword. "Send it to the State Judicial Board and the press, every outlet we've got. I want this in inboxes before noon." "And the Department of Justice?" James asked. Alicia looked out the window at the waking city. "They'll come to us." Across town, Judge Keller sat alone in his chambers, blinds drawn. The whispers had already begun. Reporters were circling. Anonymous court clerks had leaked that Alicia Monroe was compiling something big. He thought the storm had passed with the video. He had no idea it was just the opening scene. Because while he'd spent 5 years delivering sentences, Alicia Monroe had just delivered evidence. And evidence doesn't fade. Evidence doesn't beg. Evidence prosecutes. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m., but by 9:15 the building was already overflowing. Camera crews packed the sidewalk. Journalists elbowed their way into the atrium, jostling for position, lenses clicking like distant thunder. A wave of electricity rippled through the crowd, not from celebrity, but from urgency. This wasn't just another media event. This was war, and the woman at its center was about to drop the first bomb. At exactly 10 o'clock, the doors opened. Alicia Monroe stepped up to the podium flanked by two of her top legal analysts and her chief data scientist, James Chen. She wore a tailored black suit, not flashy, but formidable. Her face was composed, but her eyes burned with precision. Behind her, projected onto a massive screen, were the words, "Documented Bias, a 5-year study of systemic disparity in Municipal Courtroom 204. The room fell into silence. Cameras clicked, and then Alicia began. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady, measured. "5 days ago, I walked into a courtroom to pay a simple parking ticket. What I encountered was not justice. It was a weapon cloaked in robes, disguised as procedure, and sharpened by decades of unchecked power." The reporter sat frozen, pens hovering midair. Alicia continued, each word cutting sharper than the last. "What happened to me wasn't unique. It wasn't even unusual. What made it different was that it was recorded, and now it's been analyzed." She turned slightly and gestured toward the screen. The data began to appear, slowly at first. Bar charts, heat maps, audio waveform overlays of judges interrupting minority defendants. Then the real numbers hit like a punch to the gut. Black defendants fined 412% more on average for identical misdemeanors. Incarceration rates 5 times higher for people of color, even for nonviolent infractions. 89% of cases involving minority defendants were denied full explanation or appeal. Gasps filled the room. No one looked away. "These aren't allegations," Alicia said. "These are facts, pulled from over 10,000 court transcripts, verified against state records, and processed by Fairdata's AI system." She paused. Let it sink in. For 5 years, Judge Raymond Keller operated a courtroom that did not serve justice. It served prejudice, selective enforcement, and silence. Now the cameras were rolling nonstop. Live streams blew up across platforms. Comments flooded in. "This is bigger than a parking ticket. Burn it all down." She's not just exposing him. She's exposing them all. Alicia took a breath, then delivered the next blow. "This report has been submitted to the Illinois State Judicial Review Board, the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, and the Office of the Inspector General." A murmur of shock passed through the reporters. Yes, this was official. Federal official. "The DOJ has acknowledged receipt," she added. "Their investigation begins today." The room erupted. Reporters jumped from their seats, shouting questions, hands waving wildly. Alicia raised a hand, calm, powerful, in complete control. "I'll take questions in a moment, but first let me be clear." Her gaze swept the room. "This isn't just about one judge. This isn't even about one courtroom. This is about an entire infrastructure that allows injustice to flourish. Not with bullets, but with biases. Not with weapons, but with paperwork." She stepped back slightly as James Chen took the mic. He began detailing their process. How Fairdata used machine learning to detect verbal bias, quantify sentencing disparities, and compare thousands of rulings across socioeconomic and racial lines. He explained how their findings showed patterns that extended beyond Keller's courtroom. Echoes of injustice reverberating across counties, across states. And Alicia just stood behind him, silent, poised, watching the walls crumble. By noon, the press conference was the lead story on every major network. CNN, MSNBC, BBC. Even Fox ran a segment, though they buried Alicia's credentials behind the words, "tech billionaire turned activist." Social media detonated. The hashtag #Justice for All soared past 60 million mentions. More than 1 million people downloaded the free version of the Fairdata app within 24 hours. Whistleblowers from other courts began coming forward, sharing documents, recordings, stories. It had begun. Back in Washington, D.C., the Department of Justice held an emergency closed-door session. Deputy AG Linda Suarez called Alicia personally. "You just turned a parking ticket into a national reckoning," she said. Alicia's voice was calm. "I just turned data into daylight." At the Illinois State Capitol, the Judicial Oversight Committee convened a special inquiry. Subpoenas were issued. Judge Keller was placed on immediate administrative leave. His office issued a one-sentence statement. "We are cooperating with all investigations." But it was already too late. The court of public opinion had delivered its verdict. The judge had been judged, and Alicia Monroe had done what few had ever dreamed. She held the justice system accountable in its own language. Later that evening, Alicia stood on the balcony of her office, watching the sun sink behind the Chicago skyline. Her team worked tirelessly behind her, phones ringing, analysts typing, printers spitting out reports. The war was far from over. But the first battle? She had won it without firing a single shot. Just evidence, just facts, just truth, spoken with precision, broadcast to millions. Impossible to unsee. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was everyone's. And it was just beginning. The news broke like a lightning strike through the city's legal community. Judge Raymond Keller, suspended, effective immediately. The headline flashed across every news channel, every social feed, every courtroom whisper chain. An official statement from the State Judicial Oversight Committee confirmed what many had secretly hoped but never believed possible. An independent investigation had found credible evidence of systemic misconduct and racial bias. He was removed from the bench pending a full inquiry, and just like that, the man who had once towered over defendants with a gavel in his hand and condescension in his voice found himself on the other side of the law's gaze. No longer a symbol of justice, but of everything that had gone wrong beneath its surface. Keller's chambers were sealed by noon. Security escorted him out the back exit of the courthouse, away from cameras and crowds. He kept his head down, but the damage had already been done. Protesters had gathered outside the court steps with signs that read, "Bias in black robes" and "Justice is not yours to twist." Some chanted Alicia Monroe's name. Others held up screenshots of their own court records, scars from encounters with a system that never gave them a chance. Inside courtroom 204, the air was different, cleaner almost. Gone was the scent of stale authority. In its place was a sense of reckoning. And for the first time in years, the defendants who walked through those doors weren't just bracing for punishment, they were being heard. One of the first to benefit was 62-year-old Dolores Jenkins, who had been fined $3,200 for a broken headlight and a disrespectful tone during her court appearance 2 years prior. She had paid in monthly installments, scraping together what she could from her pension checks. When a letter arrived informing her that her case was under review and that she might qualify for full reimbursement, she thought it was a scam. It wasn't. 3 days later, Dolores stood in the same courthouse where she'd once been humiliated. Only now she was greeted by a legal assistant with a check, an apology letter signed by a court administrator, and a personal note from Alicia Monroe's Justice for All initiative. Tears filled her eyes. "I thought I was crazy," she whispered. "Thought it was just me." She wasn't alone. Case after case was reopened. Thousands of files flagged by Alicia's AI-powered analysis were being reviewed in real time by an emergency legal task force. The numbers were staggering. Over 3,400 defendants had received fines exceeding state guidelines under Judge Keller's watch. Over 1,100 had faced jail time for minor violations that by law shouldn't have warranted more than a citation. Every one of those people was being contacted. Every one of them was owed an apology, and some much more. James Chen, Alicia's legal director, described it best. "We're not just cleaning up a courtroom. We're digging a root out of the ground. This wasn't bad judgment. This was a pattern, one built on race, status, and silence." The press dubbed it the Keller collapse. And still, Alicia stayed focused. She didn't gloat, didn't take a victory lap. She was already looking ahead, to the counties beyond, to judges who had watched Keller with admiration, perhaps even copied his methods. But even she allowed herself one moment to breathe. That afternoon, Alicia returned to the courthouse, not as a defendant, not as a headline, but as a symbol. As she walked through the front doors, the same clerk who had once looked past her now stood and said, "Miss Monroe, welcome back." She nodded, but her eyes swept the hallway. There, near the exit, a young man sat with his mother. He wore a threadbare jacket, clutching a crumpled citation. His eyes met Alicia's with something unspoken, hope, maybe, or simply awe. She walked over and offered her hand. "I'm Alicia," she said. "Do you need help with your case?" He nodded, stunned. Alicia smiled. "You're not alone anymore." Outside, reporters were still broadcasting, analysts still arguing, and politicians still scrambling to get on the right side of history. But inside that courthouse, something was changing. The files were no longer just ink and paper. They were stories, real people, real pain, and real accountability. At a hastily arranged press briefing later that week, the state's Chief Justice addressed the growing firestorm. "The judiciary is meant to be a pillar of fairness," she began, her voice strained. "What we've uncovered under Judge Keller's tenure is unacceptable, and we are committed to full restitution for those harmed." Restitution. It was a start. But Alicia wasn't done. In a private meeting with DOJ officials, she presented a new proposal, a permanent judicial analytics platform powered by fair data, designed to detect bias before it became institutionalized. It would flag anomalies in sentencing, monitor interruption rates by race and gender, and send automatic alerts to ethics boards when judges deviated from established norms. The officials were stunned. "You want to monitor judges in real time?" one of them asked. Alicia's response was simple. "No," she said. "I want the people to monitor power." Back in the city, the refunds kept coming. So did the apologies. And slowly, stories of heartbreak gave way to stories of justice. A man who missed his daughter's wedding because of an illegal bench warrant. A woman who lost her job over a $700 fine she never should have received. A teenager who spent a weekend in jail for wearing a hoodie to court. Each story was a scar, each refund a small bandage. But together they were proof. The system could be forced to look in the mirror. And for once, it didn't look away. Judge Keller, now sitting at home under investigation, watched the news unfold with blank eyes. Gone was the gavel, gone was the robe. In their place was silence and the slow, dawning realization that power, once abused, can never truly be reclaimed. Not when the people rise, not when the truth is written in code, broadcast in daylight, and carried by voices like Alicia Monroe's. Justice hadn't just arrived. It had been engineered. The media storm had quieted. The cameras were no longer lined up outside courthouse doors. The chants had faded from the streets, and Judge Keller's name had slipped into the shadows of consequence. But for Alicia Monroe, the real work was only just beginning. In a bright, glass-walled conference room 8 floors above the city, Alicia stood before a sea of journalists, attorneys, civic leaders, community activists. Her eyes scanned the room, not for attention, but for alignment. Every person seated before her had felt the weight of injustice in some form. Now they were here to build something that would fight back. She stepped up to the podium, voice clear and resolute. "Today we're not just reacting," Alicia said. "We're creating. We're building a system to protect the people who have always stood last in line for justice." Behind her, a sleek screen lit up with a new logo. Simple, bold, unforgettable, Equal Justice Fund. The crowd leaned in. "This fund," Alicia continued, "will provide free legal support to low-income individuals facing fines, court penalties, or systemic bias. We're done watching vulnerable communities be punished for being poor." There was no applause yet, just silence. The kind of silence that precedes something powerful. "We have already secured over $50 million in private donations, tech partnerships, and community grants," she said. "That money will pay for legal teams, emergency appeals, training programs, and data-driven reform." Murmurs erupted across the room. Alicia raised her hand. "But that's just the beginning." A new slide appeared, this time showing a mobile phone screen with a sleek, dark blue interface and a name across the top, Court Check. The audience shifted, intrigued. "This app," Alicia said, "is what happens when data meets justice." Developed by Fair Data's elite engineering team, Court Check was designed to do what no courtroom watcher ever could. It listened, it calculated, it remembered. Here's how it worked. Whenever a user entered a courtroom, the app activated. Using real-time audio recognition and AI-backed analytics, Court Check logged the duration of each hearing, the fine amounts handed down, the frequency and tone of interruptions, and the racial, gender, and socioeconomic context of each ruling. With every court session it monitored, the app grew smarter, more accurate, more impossible to ignore. If a judge consistently finds black defendants 300% more than white ones, Alicia explained, CourtCheck will flag it. If certain zip codes are receiving jail time for infractions others get warnings for, the data won't let it slide. Gasps filled the room. A journalist from the New York Times raised her hand. Will this app be available to the public? Alicia didn't hesitate. It's already in app stores. There was the applause, sudden, explosive. But Alicia wasn't done. We're not just holding power accountable, she said. We're equipping people with tools to stand their ground in courtrooms that have long been stacked against them. She pointed to the screen again. CourtCheck will generate live reports, track patterns, upload anonymized data to our public dashboard. No more backroom deals. No more selective sentencing hidden behind closed doors. Already, stories were emerging from pilot cities. In Atlanta, the app flagged a judge who had sentenced 72% of non-white defendants to jail for traffic-related violations. The Oversight Board, backed by Equal Justice Fund lawyers, launched an internal probe within 48 hours. In Los Angeles, a single mother used the app to record her hearing after being fined $900 for expired plates. The data revealed her sentence was 5 times the local average. Her fine was overturned. In Chicago, where Alicia first challenged Keller, CourtCheck was being adopted as a model program for judicial transparency, with all municipal judges now subject to quarterly public scoring reports. This was not a tool. This was a movement coded in code. And at its center stood Alicia Monroe, no longer just a survivor of injustice, but its architect's reckoning. Back inside the conference room, Alicia took a final breath. Justice cannot depend on how loudly you speak, she said. It must depend on what's true, and truth, when recorded, cannot be silenced. Reporters rushed forward with questions. Nonprofits lined up for funding applications. Law students offered to volunteer. Alicia smiled, tired but more alive than ever. Across the country, the Equal Justice Fund's phone lines lit up. People called in from small towns and major cities. Some with stories, some with pleas, some just to say thank you. Back in her office, Alicia watched as the CourtCheck live feed logged its 10,000th courtroom interaction. Each data point, each timestamp, was another nail in the coffin of judicial abuse. But for her, it was never about revenge. It was about prevention. Injustice thrives in the dark. Alicia had built a spotlight, one no judge, no robe, no gavel could escape. And now courtrooms everywhere were being forced to answer a question they'd long ignored. Are you fair? Are you consistent? Are you accountable? With CourtCheck and the Equal Justice Fund, there would be no more hiding, because from now on, the people were watching. The courtroom was quiet, eerily so. Not because of judgment being handed down, but because, for the first time in decades, Judge Raymond Keller stood not behind the bench, but in front of it. The man who had once ruled from on high now stood before a sea of flashing cameras and heavy silence, no longer a figure of authority, but of reckoning. A podium had been placed just outside the courthouse steps, surrounded by reporters, former defendants, civic leaders, and curious onlookers. News vans lined the block. Police tape had been set up, not to keep people out, but to keep the chaos contained. It was a national moment, and every lens was aimed at Keller. The once proud man looked smaller. He wore no robe, no black authority to shield him now, just a simple gray suit. His shoulders slumped, his face pale. The gavel he'd once slammed so effortlessly now lived only in people's memories, and in countless viral clips of injustice. He stepped forward, placed both hands on the podium, and for a moment, just stood there. Then he bowed his head. A hush swept over the crowd, not out of respect, but out of raw anticipation. Could this man who had wielded his power with such cold finality for 30 years actually admit what he'd done? He raised his head, and he spoke. For 3 decades, I sat in judgment of others. I believed I was fair. I believed I was balanced. I believed I was just. But I was wrong. Gasps echoed across the square. The data doesn't lie. The numbers are real. And the truth is, for over 30 years, I let bias cloud my decisions. I let assumptions speak louder than facts. I let the color of a person's skin decide their fate. And for that, I am deeply, painfully sorry. He swallowed hard, voice cracking. No apology can undo the pain I caused. No statement can erase the fear I brought into people's lives. But I'm here, not to seek forgiveness, only to take responsibility. He looked up, his eyes glassy. Behind him, Alicia Monroe watched silently from the steps of City Hall, arms crossed, face unreadable. Miss Monroe, he said, turning toward her, you didn't just expose me. You showed the nation what justice should look like, and you did it with grace, not vengeance. Thank you for holding me accountable when no one else did. With that, Keller stepped back, nodded once, and left the podium, escorted away not by officers, but by silence. And then the cameras shifted. The attention turned, because Alicia Monroe was walking toward the same podium. But her steps were different, measured, steady, filled not with triumph, but with purpose. She reached the mic and stood tall, scanning the crowd. Her presence alone silenced the murmurs. And then she spoke. What you just witnessed was not redemption. It was acknowledgement. And let me be clear, we didn't fight this battle to humiliate one man. We fought it to wake a system that's been asleep for far too long. The crowd hung on every word. We didn't seek revenge. We don't want to trade one injustice for another. What we want, what we demand, is something far more difficult, far more powerful. True justice. She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Justice means a single mother isn't forced to choose between groceries and court fines. Justice means a teenager doesn't go to jail for speaking out of turn. Justice means your zip code doesn't decide your sentence. Justice means you matter, whether or not you have money, power, or a three-piece suit. She looked directly into the cameras now. This is bigger than Keller. This is about a system that enabled him, protected him, and turned away every time someone said, "This isn't right." No more. Applause began to rise from the crowd, slow at first, then thunderous. But Alicia held up her hand. She wasn't finished. We're not here to gloat. We're here to rebuild, to reimagine what a courtroom should be. And that begins with truth, with transparency, with accountability. That begins today. A large banner unfurled behind her on City Hall's balcony, "Equal Justice Now." Below it, thousands gathered, many of them wearing shirts printed with number "Justice for All," the movement that had started with Alicia's courtroom encounter and spread like wildfire across the nation. Alicia continued, "For every person who was silenced, dismissed, or punished for simply existing, we see you. For every person who walked into a courtroom and felt powerless, we stand with you. And for every person who still believes the law is above them, untouchable, unquestionable, we're coming, with facts, with voices, and with the truth." The cameras zoomed in on her face, calm, fierce, unshakable. Let this day be a turning point, not for headlines, not for politics, but for the soul of justice in this country. And let it be known, we don't break the system by shouting. We expose it, one courtroom at a time. She stepped back. The crowd surged. The plaza outside City Hall erupted, not in celebration of a downfall, but in affirmation of a new beginning. From somewhere in the crowd, a chant began to rise. No more silence. No more shame. Justice now, in our name. And above it all, Alicia stood still, letting the people's voices rise, stronger than any gavel, louder than any verdict. She had begun her journey facing a judge who tried to shame her. Now she stood as the one reshaping the very foundation he once sat upon. Not through revenge, through justice. The chamber inside the Illinois State Capitol was standing room only. Every seat filled with lawmakers, advocates, students, former defendants, and members of the press, all drawn together by a single historic event. The governor stood at the podium, flanked by Alicia Monroe and her team, as cameras clicked and live feeds broadcast across the country. Today, the governor began, we sign into law a bill that should have been written long ago, but one that exists today because of tireless courage, unrelenting truth, and the voice of a woman who refused to be silenced. Behind him, a banner stretched across the room, the Equal Justice Act. It wasn't just symbolic, it was seismic, effective immediately. Every judicial ruling statewide would require written justification. No more backroom fines or vague sentencing. Each decision would be recorded, documented, and available for scrutiny. All judges, municipal, circuit, and appellate, were now mandated to undergo annual anti-bias training. Not optional, not ceremonial. Designed by behavioral scientists and led by civil rights experts, these sessions would challenge prejudice at its root and test judges on their understanding of equality under law. Most revolutionary of all, courtroom data would now be public. Any citizen could access a digital platform, developed in partnership with Alicia's court check team, and view fine averages, incarceration rates, and judicial trends by district, race, income, and gender. For the first time, the people could see exactly how justice was being handed down. And for the first time, judges would know they were being watched. It was a hard-fought victory. Alicia stood without a word as the governor signed the bill into law. She didn't need to speak. Her silence echoed louder than applause. She had spent months testifying, pushing through opposition, enduring backlash. Now the system itself was changing, not just because of her voice, but because of her proof. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the glass walls of City Hall, Alicia stepped outside into the quiet. The noise had died down. The headlines were already being written. But for her, the most important conversation was still to come. She turned, and there stood Marcus, no longer the nervous intern seated in the back row of a courtroom. Now in a dark navy suit, briefcase in hand, court check pin gleaming on his lapel, a full-fledged attorney. They exchanged a quiet smile. He stepped closer, looking her in the eye. "When I sat in that courtroom and watched them disrespect you, I felt helpless," he said. "I saw injustice with my own eyes, and I did nothing." Alicia shook her head gently, but he continued. "But you," he said, voice firming, "you didn't just show me what justice looks like. You gave it shape. You gave it tools. You showed me that fighting back doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be true." He paused, his voice catching slightly. "You didn't just help me believe in justice again. You helped me become part of it." Alicia's throat tightened. She didn't reply. Not right away. She didn't need to. The battle they had witnessed, survived, and overcome together now lived in law, in code, in classrooms, and courtrooms far beyond that city. They stood together as the wind whispered through the trees, and somewhere not far away, a courtroom door opened. This time, justice would walk through it, documented, visible, and unafraid. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.